I'll start with my far left.
My name is Maurice Kimuli. I'm a member of the panel.
Thank you.
Good morning, Doctor. My name is Dr. Alfis Abdallah, a member of the panel.
Thank you.
Good morning, Dr. Jeruto. My name is Gideon Solonka, a member of this panel.
Thank you.
Good morning, Dr. Dina. My name is Reverend Father Joseph Mutie, a member of the panel.
Thank you.
Welcome, Dr. Jeruto. I am a warrior choker, Vice Chair of the panel.
Thank you.
Morning, Dr. Jeruto. I'm Elizabeth Mayo, member of the panel.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Dr. Dina, my name is Elizabeth Muli and I'm the chair of the panel. Thank you. Welcome once again. I'll request that you respond to our questions in a concise manner because we've had the opportunity to read your application and your CV thoroughly. So really this is more about trying to understand you better. Yeah. If at any time you need clarification, please don't hesitate to ask a panelist to clarify. Sure. So allow me to start by mentioning that I've looked at your CV. I see you have over 21 years in academia, in administration, in human resource management. Yes. So maybe you can share key highlights of your career path that demonstrate that you are the ideal candidate to be appointed as an IBC commissioner. Okay.
Thank you, Madam Chair and panel at large. I would really like to appreciate the opportunity to come before the panel to showcase my suitability for the position of chair of a commission, member of the commission. To begin with, maybe I can just say a little bit about myself. As you're aware, my name is Dr. Dina Kipkebut. I was born in Baringo County 54 years ago, soon to be 55. I started my basic education from a school in the village, Solian Primary School. Thereafter, I proceeded to Moi Girls, Eldoret, then it was called Highlands Girls, for my secondary education, that is Form 1 to Form 4, and then proceeded on to Kapsabet Girls for my secondary school higher education, that is KSCE. And then I was admitted to the University of Nairobi. Prior to that, I had a 3-month stint at the NYS. Those days there was a requirement to enter the university, so I did 3 months prior to going to the University of Nairobi, where I went and did a Bachelor of Arts degree in political science and philosophy. And then I was hired at Egerton in 1990, where I have been to date, so my CV has only one employer. In 1994, I felt the need to improve my academics, and I won a government scholarship via the World Bank and proceeded to the UK, where I did my master's in business administration. I went back to my job in 1995, soon after I finished my studies, and I continued working until the year 2004 that I had the urge to improve my academics. And I applied for a government scholarship and I was successful. I won a government scholarship that fully funded my PhD studies in the UK. And I did go and I finished my studies in the year 2010 and I resumed my work at Egerton University. So again, I have been at Egerton, and maybe I can go back again to my work experience at Egerton. I was hired in 1990 as an administrative assistant. That is the lowest level at management. I was working at the faculty level, where I was responsible for managing student issues, from processing of examinations, dealing with students' disciplinary issues. I was the faculty secretary, and I was a member of various committees in the faculty. I continued rising. I became a senior assistant registrar, a senior assistant administrator, then rose to the position of assistant registrar. And in the year 2000, I moved from the faculty level, where I had been for 10 years, and I was made to be in charge of admission issues in the university. I became the admissions officer from the year 2000 to 2004. Prior to proceeding for my PhD. And in that capacity, I was in charge of the overall management of admission-related issues. I was the one that was processing application letters. I would print letters for students who are admitted through the Joint Admissions Board. I was responsible for processing list of students, ensuring that we have the right students that are admitted into the university. I was responsible for preparing for admission of students every semester when they came into the university. I made coordination with the Higher Education Loans Board to ensure that the students who had applied loans were able to receive their loans in a timely manner. Thereafter, I proceeded to the UK. When I came back in the year 2010, August, September, resumed work. By then, I had been promoted to the position of Senior Assistant Registrar. And at that particular point, I was in charge of the transcripts and certificate office, a very sensitive place where I was responsible for keeping in safe custody student certificates. I oversaw the printing of certificates, and I was in charge of both the blank and the printed certificates. Again, as you are aware, from the scandals we have had in the country, issues of people having fake certificates is not something new. It has occurred. During my tenure in that office, I had the opportunity of being brought a certificate by an employer through the security operators to confirm whether that particular certificate of somebody who was working then at the Catholic Diocese was a genuine certificate. And I was able to write a report that indeed it was not a Egerton University certificate, although it had all the features of Egerton, indeed it was not the certificate. So I am aware of the sensitive nature of that office, and I carried out to the best of my ability. I coordinated with the faculties to ensure that we have the correct number, registration and details of students who are graduating, that the transcripts are also reflecting the true records in the university. And then after that, in 2011, the university advertised for a position of lecturer at the Faculty of Commerce, and I did apply, and therefore I transitioned from being in administration into teaching. I've had 10 years of teaching experience, 21 years experience in non-teaching. During my teaching experience, I have mentored students. I have taught several courses at undergraduate as well as postgraduate level. I have supervised both master's and PhD students. I've carried research. I have been a head of department during that period of time. For a period of 5 years, I was the chair of department of business administration. I have been a member of various committees. I have been a member of faculty curriculum development. I have developed 8 modules for our e-campus. I have been a mentor to students. I have at some point supervised, been an observer in student elections. So in a nutshell, with all this that I'm saying, I want to believe from my 31 years of experience at Egerton University, I have amassed a wealth of experience. From my non-teaching experience, we had the opportunity to handle very sensitive student records from examinations. I will not deny I have had instances of students trying to come and talk to you in court to change some marks because they think that they should get better. I've had those instances. So I am aware of the integrity of managing records. I have been able to supervise staff, both non-teaching and teaching. Again, in my 31 years as a COD, I have been responsible for 14 teaching staff. I've chaired meetings. I have resolved conflict. I have monitored performance of our teaching staff. Under the non-teaching, again, I have handled various sensitive offices and sensitive nature of work. And during my period of work, the 31 years, I have never had myself brought into any position where my work performance or my integrity in delivering my work has ever been brought to issue in my time in Egerton University. I hope I have been clear.
Thank you so much, Dr. Dinah. Please confirm if you are a registered voter.
Yes, I am. Okay. My registration center is Uhuru Primary School, which is in London Ward of Nakuru West.
Thank you. Yes. And your county of record is?
My county of?
Yes, because you said you were born in Baringo.
I was born in Baringo, but I have lived in Nakuru for 31 years.
Okay.
Yes, so I consider myself a resident of Nakuru.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
I'll now ask Mr. Morris Kimuli to ask you a few questions.
Okay.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Dr.
Yes, sir.
We looked at your case study,
Yes.
and while you are responding to a crisis that was expressed in the case study,
Yes, sir.
you said that you would have the commission call for an emergency meeting and to discuss issues touching on the core mandate of the commission
Yes.
under Article 88 of the Constitution. What would you say are the aspects of the mandate of the commission under Article 88 of the Constitution?
Thank you, sir. The key mandates of the Constitution under Article 88, first of all, is to handle all matters related to elections and referenda. And the specific items coming from that, number one, is to ensure voter registration, to ensure continuous updating of the voter register. Thirdly, to handle issues related to delimitation of boundaries of constituencies and wards. D is to handle any electoral dispute except those that emanate from the general election. Facilitate for observers and monitoring and evaluation of the election. Come up with regulations in the process of nomination, party nominations. Use of technology to ensure that technology is used in the right way. I'm not sure I still remember the others.
That's all right. That's all right. Let me focus on one, and this is 88(4)H. It is the facilitation of the observation, monitoring, and evaluation of elections. What, in your estimation, constitutes observation?
Thank you, sir. Observation to me is, first of all, what is being observed. The IBC Commission has specific mandate to ensure free, fair, and transparent elections. And the IBC cannot monitor itself. So in this case, we need people who are impartial, people who are not within the IBC. These are stakeholders who are outside from the realm of the IBC, people who cannot be influenced. And these are people who will be on the ground. The key things they'll be looking at is the law being observed? Is there free and fair election? Is the technology working? Are political parties interfering with the process? So this is where now you bring people like we can have international observers, we can have local observers that are selected. Part of the media constitute the observers because the media will be giving real-time information on what is going on.
So I get that. So when the Constitution says IBC has a duty to facilitate observation, yes, what is the content of that duty? Does it mean IBC will sign contracts? Does it mean IBC will pay the observers? What is the content of that duty to observe, to facilitate observation?
For me, the content of the facilitation is logistics, in terms of providing maybe transportation to reach where they are going, to also make sure that the people on the ground, the officers, allow the observers to go in. Because without that clear instruction, you might find some people who are very zealous refusing the observers from going in. They should be assured of their security. They should be assured of freedom of movement within the polling station. Yes.
So thank you very much. So what happens in circumstances, just imagining, if there was no one who expresses the intention and willingness to be an observer, will IBC still have that obligation if no one comes forward to say, I want to be an observer?
Thank you, sir. I think that would be an area of concern. if nobody wants to be an observer. It is like, imagine a scenario where we are having national examinations, okay? And let's assume this is an examination center. An examination center is high school X. And nobody from a different high school is willing to come to X to come and invigilate the exam.
Yes, that is the situation I'm
Yes.
now placing before you.
Yes.
You have a situation where IBC has a duty to facilitate observation,
Yes.
but there is no one who comes forward as interested in observing that election. Does IBC have a duty
Yeah.
to get its own observers? Or will
We
the
have,
election be carried out without observation?
No, it must have observation. And during the pre-preparation, IBC has, pre-preparation period is about 4 years. And within that 4 years, you have many stakeholders. IBC has very many stakeholders. We have the religious groups. We have foreign observers. We have civil rights movement bodies, etc. I don't want to imagine a scenario where elections are tomorrow. You've had 4 years that you do not have this list.
So in essence,
So to
your
me,
answer,
in essence, that preparation should have been put in place.
so in essence, the responsibility is for IBC, if no one comes forward,
Yeah.
to go and approach people and tell them, civil society, please come and observe our elections and give us a feedback. Is that what you're saying?
The way I look at it is that they are having continuous engagement with stakeholders. And among the stakeholders are are observers, both local and international. And I want to imagine within that period of time, with the continuous stakeholder engagement, that scenario really should not arise.
Now, with respect to observation,
Yes.
let us take the election of an MCR
Yeah.
in a polling station.
Yes.
Now, the election starts and ends at the polling station.
Yes.
Now, does the duty to facilitate observation continue or apply at every polling station, or is it a general duty?
It's a general duty, but I want to believe also at the polling station among the observers are the agents of the candidates. They are there to make sure that the election process is being run in a fair and a free manner. You may not bring other observers from, because polling stations we have 40,000. There and about.
Okay, I get your answer.
Yes.
So what briefly is monitoring and evaluation?
Monitoring and evaluation is the process of trying to find out whether what you had said you would do has actually happened. For example, the process of the election have been put in place. Then you want to go now and monitor and see if we had said we are going to have 50 polling clerks in a particular place. We are going to start election at 5 in the morning. Monitoring means, did it happen? This is what we had said we would do. Has it happened?
Is there, in your estimation, a requirement for observers, monitors, and evaluators to file a report? Is there a legal framework for making a formal reaction, or is it an informal arrangement?
No, it is formal. They must be able to make that, because that is the only way you can be able to make reforms without any monitoring and evaluation. Then the same mistakes that happen today will happen again in 5 years' time. So that is why the observers, they are recognized as legitimate stakeholders of the IBC, of the election process. Worldwide, every country has its own monitoring and evaluation teams. They have their observers, not unless the observers feel that the situation within that particular place is too precarious for their well-being, therefore that cannot happen.
Okay.
But, yes.
You mentioned agents. Agents are appointed by candidates.
Yes.
And IBC facilitates their participation
Yes.
at the polling station. There are circumstances where a candidate will not have agents. You are aware?
Yeah.
Now, do you think agents are important at the polling station?
Yes, they are.
What would be your proposal of dealing with a situation where a candidate does not have money to hire agents? Will that be a free and fair election?
I think, thank you, sir. For me, every candidate has a duty. The only way you can be assured as a candidate.
No, I'm asking, because you don't have a lot of, I'm asking,
Yes.
if a candidate does not have money to hire
To
agents,
hire the agents.
does IBC have the duty to facilitate that candidate having agents at the polling station? And would that be a free and fair election? Just because I don't have money?
I want to believe that the duty or the mandate of IBC does not go to the point of hiring an agent for me.
The
Because
mandate
how
does not
many-
extend there.
It does not extend there, because how many candidates do we have? Those are hundreds, thousands of people. So if everybody now will take that as a right now, kusema, I don't have money, so IBC pay my candidate. It goes beyond the realm of IBC.
That's all right.
The realm of IBC is to make sure that every polling station has the right number of clerks, the right number of polling officers, returning officers. Now, where there is no returning officer or a polling clerk in a particular polling center, then we say IBC has failed.
That's all right. Just a last question, and this is very brief. Do you know the first time IBC used technology in elections?
I believe it was 2013.
Are you sure?
You know the famous BVR kits?
Are you sure?
2002, there was a technology, but I'm not sure. I know
Thank
it was
you.
there.
Thank
I know
you.
it was there, but I'm not sure.
Thank you very much, Dr. Thank you very much, Madam Chair.
Yeah, thank you so much. Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Kimuli. I'll now request Dr. F.S. Abdallah to ask you a few questions.
Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Dr. Kipkevut,
Yes, sir.
I just wanted to confirm whether all the 31 years
Yes.
of your working experience has been at one place? You got the 10 years in teaching and 21 years in administration.
Yes, Dr.
Is it at one place?
It is at one place. I've had only one employer.
Right. That's you're a very patient person. It also shows that you love your job.
Yes, I do.
So why do you want to leave now?
Everybody reaches a point in their career where I have reached in my career, I feel that I would be able to bring my work experience, what I have for building my country, to make the IBC a stronger body to work with. You know, with 31 years experience, really, I do feel, I don't want to leave my job. I mean, if I get this job, God willing, then I would take leave of absence for the period of time and still go back. Hopefully, if I attain my professorship, which I'm waiting to be interviewed, then I would still have time to give back to my university. I would be serving the country in a different capacity, but I love my job. So I'm not leaving because there is a problem. I would definitely go back to Egerton should I get this job.
Thank you, but it will result, if you do get the job, you leave where you spent 31 years. That's
Just for it would be like taking a commercial break.
For 5 years, for 6 years.
Yes. I would still have, probably I would, because I'm the senior most in the department, in the area of human resource. So I would still probably have an obligation to maybe take a PhD student to supervise. That would not interfere with the job, because that would not really interfere with what I'm doing. Yeah.
Yes, Doc. Please tell us, how is this experience going to help in IBC?
The experience I have are, first of all, in terms of managerial experience, I have led, I have been a head of department, I have been head of section. When I was in the non-teaching, I headed the transcript and certificate office. I headed the admissions office, so I gained leadership experience. I have been head of department for a period of 5 years. I'm a faculty coordinator for student services. So I want to believe that I have a wealth of management experience. During the time when I have gained those experience under leadership, in the leadership realm of my jobs, I have learned how to work with people. I have learned how to solve conflicts. I have coordinated various activities from student examinations. I have in charge of managing. I'm the chief. As the head of department, I was the chief examiner. It meant that anything that goes wrong where exams are concerned, I was liable. So I made sure during my period of time there was no exam leakage. Exams were submitted on time within the deadline, so there was no time that the Senate or the Dean's Committee was ever postponed because the exams were not ready on time. So I had that experience. I've handled student conflict. There are times when you're in class, students are picketing, people start walking out of your class, you don't know what's going on. When you inquire, they are saying they are picketing, so you know how to diffuse the tension. So that I have had that experience. In my teaching experience, I have now 10 years experience of teaching, supervision, mentoring students.
Yes,
So
sir.
I would be able to bring the aspect of teaching. I have carried research, so I'm adequately fair in handling some statistical packages. I know IBC has massive data, so I would be in a comfortable zone of analyzing data, interpreting results. Like now, we would want to know from the last election in 2017 to now, what is the change in terms of voters? In 2017, probably there were around 19 million. Now, what is the size? What is the percentage increase? What is the percentage increase in terms of gender, people with disability, minority communities, etc.? So I would be able to
Statistically be able to analyze these things.
to
yes.
analyze data and
But Doc, on
interpret.
the lighter note,
Yes.
you have been supervising students.
Yes.
And many a times teachers their word is law
Yes.
in many of the schools. Here you're entering an arena where it's different. You're going to be dealing with a much, much more bigger institution.
Yes.
The whole countrywide. And above all, you're going to deal with politicians and political parties. You have the patience, the courage to get into this?
Yes, I do.
Thank you.
I think it comes with age also. It brings a lot of patience, trying to get everybody to hear everybody's side of you, even when you're supervising a student. The student has to argue their point, why they are going this particular way and not the way you want to do.
You're
Yes.
talking about age, you're to the converted. All right, sir. All right, let's go on. What do you understand by corporate governance?
Corporate governance, to me, to my understanding, is how you manage an institution using the right principles, the right laws, right procedures. So corporate governance is about doing things right in a corporate state. It's about following the rule of law. It's about doing what is supposed to be done. So good corporate governance, we have bad corporate governance. And in an institution where you talk about bad corporate governance, you see things like corruption, bribery, subverting the quality standards and that kind of thing. But when we talk about good corporate governance is where, it's a good organization, it cares about the people, it follows the rules of law, it files its taxes, it makes sure that the procedures and whatever it is that they do, whether it is production of goods or services, is meant for the good of the people that they're serving.
Yeah, thank you, Doc. Now, maybe I'll just share with you that the foundation to a good corporate governance, is the action of the individual. These actions are guided by a person's moral stance. In reference to the above statement, elaborate the characteristics that are important in the development of appropriate moral stance.
When we talk about, thank you, Dr. Ari. Moral standards, this is something within a person. It's not something that you're going to be taught, how to have the right moral standard. It is something that is innate with you. And when we talk about moral standards, it's about caring for others, it's about honesty, it's about integrity, it's about fairness. It's about how your actions are going to affect other people. It's about putting the needs of others ahead of your own. So as a leader, when we talk about moral standards of a leader, then you must espouse those particular principles, and it will reflect in the kind of decisions you make as a leader.
Thank you, Doc. Now, please tell this panel on how good corporate governance practices will benefit IBC if you're able to implement that, if you are appointed as a commissioner?
So when we talk about good corporate governance in relation to the IBC, IBC, as we all know, is an independent body. It means that ideally by law and by virtue of how it runs its businesses, it has autonomy from interference from other persons. And with good corporate governance, it means that really it should live up to its mandate, which is to offer free, fair elections. It means that as a commissioner or the commission itself, including the secretariat, should not be seen to espouse the principles of bad corporate governance. They should be firm. We know politicians will want to interfere with the operations. We have interested parties. Somebody will want to have a favor in relation to procurement. Somebody will want a favor in terms of having their people hired. But with good corporate governance, the commission is guided by various laws. We have the Procurement Act, we have the Public Finance Act, we have the various election laws, we have even its own act. And all these guide it. They have the right within the law to do things the right way. And when we do things the right way, we don't see you being put in the papers every day because you have done ABCD. So for me, with good corporate governance, if the commissioners can be able to stand firm against interference, after all they have the constitutional mandate to be an independent body, then we would see fairness and justice being emanating from that particular institution.
Yes, Doc. I heard you saying that there'll be no negative publicity and all that, yeah? Now, from what you've been reading or we've been reading, do you feel there is no good corporate governance in IBC presently?
No, I'm not saying that.
Right.
I'm not saying that.
But negativity is coming there.
I'm not saying
in your
that.
papers, right?
It is the perception, but I'm not saying that because I don't work there. I don't work there, so I wouldn't want to speak from, sometimes when you're watching from the outside, it's very easy to point fingers on something that you don't know. So the perception the public is having vis-a-vis what is going on inside, I cannot say. But from outside, of course, we saw what happened during the last elections. There was a lot of negative press, among other things. So what I'm simply saying is, within the law, if I became a member of the commission, is simply to operate within the law. We have various acts, the Leadership and Integrity, Public Ethics Act, among others, that would ensure good corporate governance.
Doc,
yes,
if you are appointed as a commissioner,
yes, sir.
Yeah, and how would you go about simplifying complex issues in order to explain it to your colleagues?
Thank you, sir. It depends on who you're dealing with within the organizational structure. If you're at the level of the commission, whatever it is that you're dealing with, whether it is the purchase of equipment or whatever it is, then first of all is to find out whether we are all at the same level of understanding. Then if somebody has an issue of understanding, then you try and use language that is as simple as possible by breaking down the issue into the barest component to enable that level of understanding, because you cannot move on from an issue when some people are left behind and they do not understand what it is you're talking about, or they do not understand why you're bringing that particular issue on the table, what is the basis. So try as much as possible to ensure that everybody is on board.
Thank you, Doctor. Thank you. Thank you, Mr.
Thank you, Dr. Abdallah. I'll now request Mr. Gideon Solonka to ask you a few questions.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Ri.
Thank you.
Now, my first question is
Yes, sir.
that the Election Act provides for one register
Yes, sir.
of voters.
Yes, sir.
This register of voters is a compilation of several registers.
Yes, sir.
Kindly tell us, what are these registers that eventually make one register?
Thank you, sir. We have, there's a register at the polling center. Then we have a register at the ward. Then we have a register at the constituency. Then we have a register at the county level. Then finally, all these are put together into one full register at the commission, which is the main body that is supposed to be the custodian of the voter register.
Thank you. Now, registration of voters and revision of the register of voters is required to be undertaken at all times.
Yes, sir.
However, there are certain instances where the commission is expressly prohibited
Yes, sir.
from registering voters.
Yes, sir.
Will you kindly tell us what are these instances?
Conditional list.
Yes.
Thank you, sir. According to the Constitution and the Election Act, no revision of the voters register can take place 60 days before an election, or I think it is 1 month, or from the day when a by-election has been announced. Then no further revision of a register can take place. So if there's going to be a by-election like the one that is about to go on at Kiamba, then it means from the day that the IEBC announced that there's going to be a by-election on date X, even if somebody wanted to move their polling station from A to Z, then that cannot happen within that period of time.
That's one instance? It's only one instance. You've mentioned one.
I've mentioned the general election and then by-election.
Yes, as one instance. Yeah.
Okay.
Any other?
I think I've forgotten.
You've forgotten. Okay.
I think also during referendum, from the time I think when they announce a referendum, there is a period of time, I'm not sure that it is 60 days also, that you cannot be able to change.
Okay. Why do you think it is necessary to specify a registration cutoff date?
Age or period?
That date?
No, the date from that
Yes.
particular time.
Yes.
Because, for example, if I give a case of a by-election, the by-election has been announced that is going to take place in a month or two. It means that people who want to influence that election would now change their polling centers from where they are to come and support this particular candidate. So it is always very important to have a time frame, and also, for example, for the election, there is the need for a period of time to clean up the register. If people were to register up to the last minute, then it becomes practically impossible to have time to edit the register. So that timeline is important for when registration ends. Then there'll be a period of time when people will come and inspect to find out whether their details have been captured. And then also, just prior to the election, the commission will have had enough time to update the register.
Okay, thank you. Now, a defined electoral cycle is critical for successful elections.
Yes, sir.
Give us a brief overview of our electoral cycle in Kenya and highlight what can be done to improve our adherence to the electoral cycle in our electoral processes.
Thank you, sir. The electoral cycle runs over a period of 5 years, and we have the pre-election cycle, which runs, in my estimation, I'm not sure, probably up to a period of about 4 years. Then we have the election cycle. I want to put the pre-election period of about 3 years, in my estimation. That is where you have the planning process for the election. Within that period, you have voter registration, you have voter education, budget planning, you have stakeholder engagement, and then you have the election period. The election period will run over a period of 1 year. I think the IBC so far has now released the timeline for gearing up to the elections in August next year. So this is the period where party nominations will take place, training will take place, things like updating the voter register, And then now we have the post-election period where now monitoring and evaluation, the control function takes place. You want to find out what went right, what went wrong. Are there certain law reforms that we need to take place? So it's like now this is the period where you look back and see what did we do right, what did we do wrong, what is it that we want to make sure that during the next cycle it does not occur again. Yes.
Thank you, Dr. What is a conclusive electoral cycle?
Conclusive.
A conclusive electoral cycle.
I'm not sure I understand that, because I have given the three, which is the pre-election, election, and the post-election. So that becomes a cycle that runs over a period of 5 years, because the Kenyan election system is a 5-year system that takes place. So from 2017, we are gearing towards 2022. I'm sure the activities that the IBC has been engaging in through that period, we may not see it. I think we only see the IBC during the election time. But behind the scenes, during the pre-election time, this is where a lot of behind-the-scenes activities are taking place within the commission.
Fine, I understand that.
Yes.
But then there's something called a conclusive electoral cycle. Or if you are not able to answer that,
yes.
What is an inconclusive electoral cycle?
I think that maybe if to understand the conclusive election cycle is where I think where how did you end the election? Are there any laws? Did things end the way they were supposed to? I'm not sure I understand that. Yeah.
Thank you,
Okay.
Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Solonka. I'll now ask Madam Elizabeth Mayo to ask you a few questions.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Good afternoon, Dr. Jeruto.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Madam Mayor.
Yeah, it's already afternoon. In an electoral process, the
Yes.
media plays a very critical role.
Yes, sir. Yes, Madam.
If you are appointed as a commissioner,
Yes.
what would be your expectations from the media being one of your key stakeholders?
My expectation of the media is to offer fair media coverage. I would expect the media not to inflame. I think one of the key issues that came up during the post-election violence of 2007 was a key role that the media played. Particularly the vernacular media stations were found to have taken sides with the various political key players. They became avenues for inflaming the war, So for me, if I was to get the position, I would really want to have stakeholder engagement with the media, the mainstream media, as well as the various small media houses, particularly those that are aligned to a particular ethnic group, to really impress upon them the role they play in either Kenya burning or Kenya remaining safe. That Kenya is for all of us, not for a particular sectarian group. I would not want to see a place where Kalenjin FM is busy inciting people against others, Inoro or whatever other station that is there, taking a role of where they are making statements that are going to rise up the temperature. Instead, they should be forum for preaching peace and abstain from negative ethnicity, because each one of us is a member of an ethnic group, and everybody should be proud of who you are. I didn't choose to be born who I am. You didn't choose to be who you are, and we are brothers and sisters. I want to believe that if I was to meet you being mugged today, I would not say, who is this one is not my tribe, so let me just walk away. I would want to believe that we'd have that brotherhood, that sisterhood, be my brother's keeper. And that means the media should also take that responsibility of ensuring that our country doesn't burn. They should preach peace, no matter what the politicians tell them.
So as a commissioner,
Yes.
what action will you take practically to address this challenge so that we maintain the brotherhood, the sisterhood you are talking of?
Stakeholder engagement with the media houses. And I would want to believe that even the media houses under the Kenya Media Association, they have their own code of ethics, and with engagement with also the Association of Media Houses to impress upon the need of enforcing that code of standards of how they're supposed to report, how they're supposed to communicate. If a caller calls in and is making inflammatory statement and the presenter or the media person is allowing that conversation to continue, then sanctions should be taken against the media house. Either their licenses are cancelled to send a strong message that this kind of behavior is not allowed. So stakeholder engagement with each and every body that guards the media houses, including the CAK and the Ministry of Communication, to ensure that everybody, the media houses, becomes a responsible media house.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Jeruto. We have this category of stakeholders called the bloggers, the influencers, and the opinion shapers.
Yes.
You know them?
Yes, I've heard of them.
You have heard of them?
Yes.
So, what is your expectation of them, and what do you think you can do as a commissioner of IBC to ensure that there is no adverse report about you as a commissioner and about the commission also?
Thank you, madam. I think one of the key concerns today, particularly in elections, is the use of social media. Social media is good and it is also negative. We have seen people who are called bloggers. Unfortunately, I'm not in most of, I think also by virtue of age, I'm not in most of the current social media. I think I'm in Facebook, which I hardly update, and WhatsApp is the only thing that I use. But I have had the opportunity of reading some of the things. There are politicians who are putting in their payroll what we call the social media warriors, and the mandate is just to spread fake news, to put people down on the basis of what part of the political divide they are serving. So for me, if I'm taken in as a commissioner, again, is to have an engagement with communication ministry. We have cybercrime laws, and these need to be put into effect. If you're going to be a media, social media influencer, young people are following these people. We have people that have such massive followings from what we call the media influencers. And if that media influencer says the wrong thing, people take things as black and white. If, for example, somebody posts in their social media that so-and-so has killed, so-and-so, everybody will take it as the gospel truth. And that means for me is for social media influencers, if they are to be worth their salt, is to ensure that they use that position that they've been given to spread peace and to ensure any information that comes out of their social media sites is actually credible and will not bring disrepute or conflict within the country.
What I'm looking for is that what will you do as a commissioner?
As a commissioner,
just 1 minute,
okay.
Let me finish. What will you do as a commissioner to stop such a risk occurring?
So for me, as a commissioner, of course, as a commissioner, I cannot go to their site directly and engage them. So to use the relevant bodies, we have the CAK, and the role of the CAK mandated within the Constitution. They are anchored within the Constitution, and they have the various laws that guide communication, cybercrime, etc. Is to really ensure that for where there is an influencer who is breaching the peace, is to have those accounts shut. And I think it is within the right of the ministry to ensure that that happens. Because if the commission wants to do its job, if IBC is to do its job in a free and fair environment, and somebody somewhere is engaging the public by giving very negative, inflammatory information, I would want to believe that the commission has the right to bring that to the attention of the relevant bodies, which is the CAK, and have the relevant body to take up sanctions.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Ari. Don't you think that for that to happen, it means that there is a gap? And this group of stakeholders are just filling the gap that you have not actually acted on.
Thank you, Madam. Now, that is where, again, as a commissioner, again, if you look at in terms of communication, if you do not communicate, people will fill the gap with rumors and half-truths. So for me, if I'm taken in as a commissioner, is to strengthen the aspect of communication. I think one of the key issues is if you are very limited with information that you share with the public, the grapevine will thrive. Rumors and half-truths. So the public relations component of the commission should be very active. Have weekly updates, especially as we go towards the preparation for the election. Have weekly updates. Let people know what is going on. If you're going to be buying a new technology, let people know what is going on. If you're going to be introducing a new measure, let people know, because when they say information is power. When that information is not out there, trust me, rumors will just fill in the gap. And this is what now you give further to the influencers. At the end of the day, for them, they thrive in having numbers. So somebody will wake up one morning, just put some rumor there, and it will trend like wildfire. But if you have shared the truth, sometimes the truth may not be palatable, but let people know from the horse's mouth, from the commission itself, this is what we are doing, this is what we are addressing, give us time, we are handling this, then people will not have that opportunity to fill the gap with a lot of half-truths or rumors. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. My next question is on the role of faith-based organizations. In your view,
Yes.
do you think the faith-based organizations have a role to play in an electoral process?
Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Please explain.
Yes, they do.
Yes?
Yes, they do. Faith-based organization, Christian, Muslim, Hindu, among others. They have a following, they have people who adhere to the faith, and because by virtue of the creed of the faith-based organization, they are peacemakers, and they have a big role as stakeholders in the election to ensure that they are able to preach peace, they are able to engage the people in participating in free elections. So for me, they are a key stakeholder in ensuring free and fair election.
Okay, thank you. And for them to actually do what you have explained to us today, what do you think are their expectations from IBC?
Thank you, Madam. Faith-based organizations would expect to engage with the IBC. IBC should not ignore. You must call them on a round table. We are going towards an election. How can you be able, as members of the faith-based organization, how are you going to fill in the gap? How are you going to help us from the place where you are? I am a member of the AIC Kiamunyi. How will AIC Kiamunyi take part in ensuring fair elections? So IBC must also call them and recognize, because without calling them, it means you don't recognize them. So there must be stakeholder engagement with the faith. They must be called to a round table. And then if it is the heads of each of the, of course you can't call the pastors at the lower level, but you call the heads of all the faith-based. Then the heads of the faith-based, once they've had the stakeholder engagement, you've all agreed on the expectations of each party, then the heads of each of the faith-based organizations now will cascade that information down to the lowest level. And at every level, there are voters who are there. If it is at Kiamunyi, if it is at whichever area it is, then they are able to disseminate that information. When polling is taking place in that particular region, the pastors, the imams in that particular area will be there to ensure that peace is maintained. They will have rallied the people to turn up and vote.
Okay, thank you. Okay, my last question is on nomination of marginalized groups and people with disabilities to the county assembly.
Okay.
So it's being argued that there are various schools of thought. One school of thought argues that the list should be given before the election.
Okay.
The other school of thought argues that it should be given after the election.
Okay.
Which school of thought do you agree with, and why?
Thank you, Madam. The issue of the party list is part of the election process, and in my view, it should go, in my own opinion, I think it should go before the election. Why am I saying that? There is a danger that after the election, the party losers, the ones who lost the election, would want to influence the list to include them. So for me, there are certain categories that should be met within the nomination of the party list. Take into consideration special interest groups, the youth, persons with disability, women, marginalized, and minority. And that list should have been prepared before, so that we don't have people who lost coming now to pay to get into that list.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Which category of members of parliament are elected through the party list system?
The ones who are elected through the party list are 12 for members of parliament. And the categories are, one, we have women, we have persons with disability, and then in terms of minority ethnic communities.
Okay, thank you. Do you know the formula used
The formula
for the allocation?
for the allocation, there should be, I think, gender 2/3 rule considered, and then if it is persons with disability, they must take at least consider male and female. And then also the other thing to consider is the party with the largest number of members get the highest proportion in the category. And then they also must look at the composition. The list must be in priority order in terms of the category, whether it is persons with disability, minority, women, etc. And then they look at the party list from each of the party that is submitting to make sure that the order in which the list is prepared, you do not pick from the same category. So if it is party X, it is done in such a way that you have the priority list, and then party Y. So if party Y had, party X was a female from, let's say, Maasai, then party Y has a person with a female from, again, Maasai, then obviously it will not make sense to have people from the same, with the same characteristic. So you also look at you take into consideration the inclusivity of people from different areas from the party list of different organizations. So if my party, if party X was this and then party Y has the same, you have to engage with that particular party and say, unfortunately we cannot take number one because in this particular party, number one shares the same characteristic as here. You have 2 parties or 3 parties, all their number one is from Rift Valley or from Coast. There is no way that you can take 3 people from the same region because of that fairness of either the particular characteristic of the people that you're picking, the region, and so on.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Jeruto. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you so much, Madam Mayor. I'll now ask the Vice Chair to ask you questions.
Thank you.
Thank you. Dr. Jeruto, do you see a day when Kenyans like us seated here will be able to vote in comfort from our living rooms? And how could we make that happen? If you had to become a commissioner,
Yeah.
in this age and era, how could we make that happen?
Thank you, Vice Chair. That is an issue that I have found to be quite fascinating. I was also something that I was reflecting some time back about how far technology has taken us. There was a time, I marvel at what we are able to achieve using mobile phones today, that I can actually receive money from somebody who is in another continent via M-Pesa to my phone directly. To me, that is something that I still found confounding. And I kept thinking to myself, with the extent in which technology has developed, I see a point where one day I should be able to vote using my mobile phone. I think that is where technology is taking us. We have countries that are exploring that option. And in my own thinking, that really we cannot be left behind by technology. Of course, there's a particular group of people that are going to be locked out from that kind of system of mobile mobile voting, if it is going to happen. We would need, of course, very serious software developers that will make sure that the system cannot be hacked. So where in the event that that happens, the IBC still has to consider people who do not have technology that is sophisticated enough to do the mobile voting, people who are in areas where they do not have access to network, people who are illiterate. I'm imagining people who are in far-flung areas, think about, Turkana, etc. They may not have the sophistication to handle such, but nonetheless, our population in 2019, the population outcome showed that 75% of the Kenyan population is 35 years and below. To me, I see a point where mobile technology will be what will be running elections. So with 7%, maybe the worry will be the 7%, who are 65 years and above, probably the age of our grandmothers and so on, who may not be able to do that. But generally, with where we are going in terms of technology development, I see that happening.
Dr. Jeruto, were you in Kenya in the 90s, early 90s, or late 80s?
Yes, I was.
In Kenya. Now, since that period, and I'm picking that period, we've had several upheavals in our electoral process, what we call post-election violence and so on. Quite often, sometimes it's pre and post, but we've had several major upheavals.
Yes.
Could you name those that you can remember, beginning with the 90s upwards?
I can think about the 80s. I have not been involved. I had just finished high school, gone into university, so I wasn't really much engaged in matters political. But I remember the infamous Mlolongo, where people used to queue behind a person, and obviously, a free and fair election must really involve a secret ballot. But there you are, you're standing behind a person, and if the queue of the person that was the wrong side of the political divide, you find goons coming to chase people and so on. So that, and again, of course, violated really the main principle of a free and fair election, in that whoever it is that you're electing, it must be done in secrecy. So I do remember that, though I never took part in it. I am not sure whether I really engaged in the 1992 elections, and 97 I did in 2002. But again, all those challenges of massive rigging, there were always allegations of box stuffing, people pre-marked votes and so on. And that is because at that particular time, again, if we remember from our history, there was heavy government involvement in the voting process. You find provincial commissioners, district commissioners were part of the polling staff. And that really did bring a lot of issues, particularly after 92, when there was the clamor for multipartyism. So elections at that particular time were rife with a lot of malpractices. 2002, I think, I'm not sure whether I was really engaged in it that much, but at least we saw the power transition. Things went well, despite, here and there, but there was a smooth transition of presidency from Moi to Kibaki, and then 2007, of course, it was a story that has precipitated the electoral reforms that we see in Kenya today.
Now, normally, these events, when they happen, a good portion of the country's population, their vote does not count.
Yes.
One way or another. How does it feel to go to a polling center, cast a vote, then you discover that you wasted your time? The whole day was lost. How does it feel, especially to a young Kenyan who's voting for the first time? He's just gotten his first his ID and finished school and gotten his first ID, and now he's voting for the first time. How does it feel for your vote not to count as a young Kenyan? What kind of country would you think it is?
So thank you, Vice Chair. I think it is a tragedy and a gross violation of the basic right of a Kenyan, which is the right to a free and fair election. And to me, the core mandate of IBC is to assure Kenyans that when you wake up at 5 in the morning to be on the queue, your vote must count, no matter what. And that can only happen through adequate preparation, through impartiality, through proper training of the clerks, through proper engagement with the political class, that indeed every Kenyan has the right to exercise their vote. For the political class, the only thing I would say is that trying to influence the right of a Kenyan, to me, is completely wrong. It's unethical. When you know people are going to vote, you have, we've seen incidences where voting has been disrupted, people sending goons, people threatening the IBC staff, etc., simply because you want your own personal will to take place. To me, I find that as highly unethical. The greatest, the core principle of our Constitution, if you look at Article 10, it tells us to be patriots. And it means that even if you're a polling clerk, even if you're a commissioner, you're a political leader, we have a right to be patriotic. One of the great principles of management by Henry Fayal in 1916, he said, as a leader, your personal interest must subjugate the greater interest of the organization. And that means
Thank you. Thank you. Just on that point.
Yeah.
This is an imaginary scenario.
Yes, sir.
You're a commissioner in the IBC.
Yes, sir.
Let's assume, now we are at the general election, the presidential election,
Yes, sir.
especially, that's what I'm referring to here. There is a problem with data transmission
Yes, sir.
from the polling stations to the National Tallying Center. There's a computer glitch which keeps doubling the vote for one of the candidates.
Yes, sir.
When it's 10, this program,
goes to
this
20.
software doubles to 20. The other candidates, theirs are being held. When it's 10, they get 5. When it's 100, that kind of stuff. So there's tension everywhere because people are watching this happening right there on their TV screens. There's tension in the country, division in the country. The party that seems to be winning, which is very influential, is insisting that that vote, the results, are the ones that should be used. The results are okay. The others that are losing, probably comprising half of the country, are saying no, the vote should be cancelled. The commission is divided completely. What position would you take? Cancel the results or?
Thank you, Vice Chair. In my own assumption is that the Commission will have put in place contingency measure in the event that technology fails. And the contingency measures, technology is technology. 1 minute you're using your mobile phone, the next minute you're trying to switch it on and it is dead. So technology is very feeble. It can fail, So there must be a contingency plan, and the contingency plan is manual transmission of results. At every polling center, we have documentation. We have the forms, probably it's Form 34A, we have Form 34, whatever. And at that particular polling station where you have the candidates who have, people have voted, it has agents from all the political parties. You've collated the results, and you have all signed, all the persons have signed. You've noted the rejected votes, you've noted the unused ballot papers, you have noted the counted votes, and each party has appended on the right forms that indeed we are satisfied as election observers that these results represent the true situation that is going on. These results from each of the polling stations, assuming all of them have done that, will be transmitted by phone and the hard copies taken and sealed. Of course, each ballot box will have a seal, I want to believe, with a unique identifier number so that nobody can open and add anything. So all the forms, all the documentation will have been sealed. Then you move on to the constituency tallying office with the hard copies. Again, the agents will be there to collect and ensure that indeed all the results from each of the polling stations are correct, and you add them up. If the transmission system fails, or if, as you say, there's an algorithm that is adding numbers for some people and reducing for others, you have the hard copy. That is indisputable. And I would want to believe where such glaring differences are occurring, because if the system is saying that X has 10,000 and the hard copy is saying that X has only 3,000, then obviously there's a problem. It is not a brainer that you're going to start discussing the technology. You simply say we go by the hard copy. Because again, if you decide to support the views of the one who the technology, the algorithm is favoring vis-a-vis the others, then that is a recipe for disaster. And at that particular point, the responsible thing that the commission says would do is to communicate to the public, to calm down the tension that is coming, is that we've noted an anomaly with the technology we are using, and kindly give us time, we will be announcing the results using the manual system. That is what I would think.
Thank you, Dr. Jirutu.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Vice Chair. I'll now ask Reverend Father Mutie to ask you some questions.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Dr. Kipkebut. Allow me to begin by asking you something that you alluded to. In the year 2004 and 2005,
Yes, sir.
you received a full scholarship to
Yes.
go and study your PhD.
Yes, sir.
Since then, what is that special thing you've done to give back to the country that gave you that opportunity?
To give back,
In
other
a,
than
in a way of appreciating, in appreciation,
Okay.
the country.
Beyond my career work that I've done, I have also contributed to society in various ways. I'm currently a secretary to our Nyumba Kumi group. I live in a wider place in Kiamunyi, where we had divided the group into 3 zones. We had Zone A, Zone B, and Zone C. And I'm proud to say that our zone is the only one that survived. The other zones, people were very uncooperative, did not want to contribute money to pay security. I am a secretary, and we have been able to keep ours very much going. We do security updates with the chief. I'm part of also the greater security, member of the security team within the Greater Kiamunyi. We have monthly meetings with the chief, among others, to update on security matters. I have also taken up, I'm an active member of our IIC Kiamunyi. I have been engaged in fundraising. We are building a nursery school for the church and Sunday school classes for the children. And I've been an active fundraiser for the community. Right now, as a member of a group of girls, or, we call ourselves Daughters of Solian, which is my village. There's a girl who is from a very needy family. She's a student in MTC. I don't know her. I knew the parents. I haven't seen the parents in probably 40 years. I just know the name. And very needy family. She's in MTC, and we've taken up to educate this girl until she completes. So she's finished her first semester. I have helped students who are needy. I have bought food for students who are struggling. I have paid rent for some of them. So that is how I would see my contribution to society for
Thank
what
you.
really the government has done. I feel really, really honored that I didn't have to struggle, to do odd jobs abroad, because the government used its resources to bring me to where I am today in my career.
Thank you, Daktari. That is very, very humbling. Allow me to ask you, just like from the law, what does the law provide with respect to state officers accepting gifts?
Thank you, Reverend. The Leadership and Integrity Act, I think it's 2012, and the Public Officers Ethics Act 2003 is very categorical. That as a state officer, you cannot accept a gift, or whether it is in monetary terms or is in kind. And in the event that you receive such a gift, it must be surrendered to the institution, and the institution must record that particular gift. And why the law bars state officers from receiving gifts is the fact that if I'm to receive a gift from somebody, then it means that I'm compromised. I will feel that sense of obligation to do what that person wants. Maybe this person wants a particular contract, but disguises na kusema, oh, I hear you have a birthday, nakuletea mbuzi. They'll still want to come and get a payback for that mbuzi. So anything that is given, as long as I'm discharging the duties that is bestowed upon me, then any gift that is given either is declined, and if you cannot decline it, then it must be clearly and in an open manner informed. I should inform my seniors in the university.
Daktari, if you are to be appointed to this position of a commissioner,
Yes, sir.
are there any personal adjustments that you do in order to comply with the Chapter 6 of the Constitution of Kenya?
The only thing that I would do is to take leave of absence from my employer, because again, as an officer, I cannot hold two jobs. So I would take leave of absence for a period of 6 years, and then once my duty of tour, my tour of duty is over, then I would go back to my employment. Because again, the Constitution is very clear, or the Chapter 6 is very clear, you cannot earn two salaries from a state body.
Thank you, Daktari.
Thank you, Reverend.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Reverend Father. Dr. Dinah,
Yes, madam.
I'll ask you a general knowledge question.
Yes.
Can you name for me
Yes, sir.
2 counties where we have democratically elected female governors, and tell us who they are?
Okay. Thank you, Madam Chair. We have Kitui County, and we have Governor Charity Ngilu. Then we have Kirinyaga County, where we have Governor Anne Waiguru.
Well done, thank you. So we've come to the end of your oral interview. I can invite you at this time to make any remarks you might have to the interview panel.
Okay. Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, panel at large. It's a very humbling experience to have actually been shortlisted. I mean, I felt great to see my name among the 660. And of course, I didn't think that I would see the shortlist. So it was a pleasant surprise. I like hiking, and I'd hiked to Menengai Crater, left my house at 5:30 in the morning to hike. And when I was at the peak, I was offline, and a friend called me and says, "You're offline, where are you?" I said, "I'm at Crater and I'm panting because, I've been climbing a hill." And she says, "Can you go to WhatsApp haraka sana?" I asked, why is the house burning? She says, "Just go, quickly. So I went online, and she had sent me a clip of The Nation where my name was there, and trust you me, the rest of the journey, I was in euphoria to see myself here, and to me, it's a career peak. Now I'm known by Kenyans. People have been calling me the whole day. "I saw your name, is that you?" So as a panel, I would just want to say that I'm grateful. I hope, of course, that I will make it to the fore. But if I still don't, I will continue to be the diligent Kenyan citizen that I am, do my work with integrity that I have been able to do for the last 31 years. So thank you, and thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Okay, thank you. And also on behalf of the panel and on behalf of Kenyans, we also want to thank you for showing interest in serving this nation in the position of IEBC Commissioner. We don't take it for granted and we wish you well.
Thank you.
So I will now ask a member of the Secretariat to escort you out.
Thank you.
And please ensure you get your original certificate.
I will.
And we wish you a good afternoon.
Thank you very much, and God bless.
You too. So we'll now take a break and resume at 2 o'clock for the next interview.
Kalamu ni yenu.